From London, and welcome to Global Government FinTech's webinar, Open Banking and Open Finance, What Role and Benefits for Governments. I'm Ian Hall, I'm the editor of Global Government FinTech, a sister title to Global Government Forum. Both our publications report on innovation in the public sector to serve our core audience of public servants around the world. According to one report published in June last year, open banking is set to become globally ubiquitous. But what is open banking? The spirit of open banking is to boost competition in financial services by enabling third parties such as fintech companies to use customers' financial data with their permission to develop new apps and services. This is enabled by what are known as open application programming interfaces, or open APIs. I'm sure we'll hear this phrase, open APIs, a fair bit in the next hour or so. And what is open finance? Open finance is the extension of open banking's data sharing principles across a far broader set of financial fields. Where do governments come in? Governments worldwide are typically encouraging open banking's development, typically, but they're rolling it out at very different speeds and in different ways. We will hear how, in the opening remarks, some governments, at least in the case of the UK's HMRC, are themselves actually already adopting open banking to improve the delivery of public services. The journey here has only really just begun. Today, as you'll have seen from the invite that you've signed up to, we're seeking to explore 4 questions. What progress has been made to deliver open banking and open finance across the world? What role should and could government have to drive implementation? How can governments themselves benefit in terms of delivering citizen services? And should and how can governments move faster? We'll begin with short opening remarks from our 5 panelists, and we aim to save about half the time to questions from you, our worldwide audience. When you have a question, just click on the Q&A at the bottom and type them in. Today's webinar is kindly partnered by Microsoft, whose support enables us to offer this webinar free to public servants. Please note the webinar is being recorded for later circulation. Our hashtag is open banking. I'm delighted that we have a fully global representation. We have Jess Robinson, Assistant Secretary for Consumer Data Right Policy and Engagement in Australia's Treasury, Diogo Silva from the Central Bank of Brazil, Michelle Bayo, who is a board member at the Open Banking Initiative Canada and also chief exec and founder of a consultancy called Finnovator, Valentina Eon, Government Industry Strategy Director at Microsoft, and Nick Down, Head of Payments at HM Revenue and Customs here in the UK. So we're now going to go on to the 5 panelists for their opening remarks, and we're heading through the night. We're going down under to Australia, over to Jess first for her. I say that because obviously she has a significant amount of time ahead of us here in London. So over to you, Jess, for your opening remarks and slides.
Thank you so much, Ian, and thank you for having me on this great panel this evening for me, but morning for most of you. So I'm really pleased today to give you a quick snapshot of where we're up to in the rollout of our consumer data right, which is our significant statutory reform to deliver open data to Australians. Next slide, please. So this slide just gives you a very high level summary of what the consumer data right is in Australia. It's a significant economy-wide reform, and the government is investing a significant amount of money alongside industry to deliver a truly economy-wide program for consumers to access their data. It's part of and a key pillar of the Australian government's digital economy strategy. It was established in legislation in September 2019, and it covers both individuals and businesses as consumers. I think what's important to understand about the Australian framework is that it has been established to be rolled out, as I've said, across the economy, And whilst we started with open banking, we are quickly now moving across to we're in a multi-sector rollout process. And we're doing that through a quite agile legislative program where we are able to extend to new sectors, new data sets through delegated legislation called designation instruments, and set up rules and standards that apply to specific sectors. But really a core part of the framework is that we have a set of core rules and standards that can ultimately be extended across to multiple sectors and data sets, which means that we will be in a rapid process of expansion over the coming years. At the moment, we are taking a sector by sector approach, but we will be moving to a much more consumer benefit focused approach that really drills down into high impact data sets across multiple sectors to really achieve a horizontal and very rich data set combination for fintechs and regtechs to produce new products and services across various sector lines. We're also at the moment only providing data sharing access, but soon we will be amending our legislation to provide for payment and action initiation, which will substantially expand the functionality of the framework. Next slide, please. This provides a very high-level explanation of the role of government in the framework. Ultimately, the Minister for the Digital Economy makes the decision around where to next in terms of expanding to different data sets and sectors. And Treasury is the core policy agency and also produces the rules and the designation instruments to actually achieve the expansion to new sectors and new data sets. We have a central approach to developing data standards through the establishment of the data standards body, and they produce both technical and consumer experience standards to have a very consistent approach across the implementation in different sectors. We have a dual regulator approach in the Australian framework. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission not only is responsible for accrediting third parties to access data, they also have the core enforcement and compliance role. They're aided on the specific privacy safeguards that the framework provides by our Office of the Australian Information Commissioner that handles primarily privacy complaints. And a key feature of the framework is that it provides extensive privacy safeguards and in particular extends the normal information protections that consumers benefit from under our broad-based privacy legislation by extending them to businesses that are otherwise carved out of those privacy protections, and also includes a range of new safeguards that protect both commercial and confidence information as well as privacy information. Next slide, please. So this gives you a very high-level snapshot of where we are in terms of our expansion. So open banking for us launched in July 2020 with the 4 major banks, and they have now completed all phases of data sharing under the framework, with joint accounts due to be released in a couple of months. We broke up the compliance activity across the banks and allowed minor banks a longer period to comply, and their compliance phases are due to be completed this year as well. It takes us up to having approximately 106 brands, banks in our open banking system that are all required to now provide access to consumers to all products and services basically that they would normally provide to consumers. We've got about 97.6% of market share in Australia now able to access open banking. So it's been a very large implementation task with significant coverage now. We've had a pretty low base of starting in terms of the number of businesses seeking accreditation under the framework, but over the last 4 to 5 months, we've seen that double to now 29 accredited data recipients, and we're expecting that to really continue to expand. We are in the process of expanding to energy, with data sharing due to commence later this year, with the launch of product data in October 2022, followed by consumer data in November. We're also busily getting ready to support expansion to telecommunications, which was designated in January this year, and we're now in the process of developing the telecommunications specific rules and standards which will allow that implementation. And then another significant start to the year, we have identified open finance as the next area of focus for expansion. And by open finance in Australia, we mean we will be looking at designating data sets both in the superannuation, general insurance, non-bank lending and merchant acquiring services sectors. So we are taking a much more agile approach of key data sets within those 4 subsectors so that we can support financial management services and products. A key part of that announcement also was that we'll be extending to government data. And this is really an important opportunity to look at the consumer through the lens of both public sector data and private sector data, and in particular, data held by government that can support for instance, superannuation outcomes or relate to how consumers interact with their insurance products. So an extremely busy period for us, and I'll be looking forward to talking about what we see are the 3 areas of growth in the next 12 months. But already, I think a significant step up for us in terms of expanding beyond banking into other areas of the economy, and then ultimately, hopefully, to open finance next year. Thank you, Ian.
Thanks, Jess. What a fantastic introduction. It's really interesting to see, you very clearly set out how the government itself is structured across the different kind of agencies of government, to see the latest kind of sign up data as well. But it's also interesting to see how energy and telecoms seem to have, kind of come in ahead of. I know that this was always kind of as it was planned to be, but often, one thinks the way these things may move out globally is open banking, then open finance, and then potentially more. So it's interesting how, there's a read across beyond financial services already in Australia. So I guess during the discussion later, we'll potentially tap into how the things relate to open banking. Shouldn't just be looked at through the prism of banking and financial services. So thanks, Jess, for that great introduction. Let's go round the world to Brazil. So thanks, Jess. Over to Diogo in Brazil.
Thank you, Ian. It's an honor being here and showcase our experience with open finance. On the slide deck, we are still using the old brand, Open Banking, where we are currently on the verge of rebranding to Open Finance, and I'll show in the next few slides what we are doing, break down some of the initiatives here in Brazil, and also explain how we are moving the needle here in Brazil. So please, can you move to the next slide? So here, just some numbers to showcase our model. So currently, we have 3 million active consents for data sharing from over 2 million different customers. So here they might be legal or natural persons. We have had more than 250 million API calls throughout the past year. Just in the first week of March, there were 30 million calls, and we expect those numbers to actually increase in the forthcoming months. We have close to 800 participating institutions. The bulk here are on the payment initiation service, where all data holders are obliged to participate. Either way, for data sharing, we have mandated the largest banks and the largest conglomerates in Brazil. We call them S1, S2, conglomerates. They have more than 1% of Brazil's GDP or relevant international presence. They are mandatory participants, but we have allowed smaller firms through reciprocity principle to participate. They would be able to participate, but they would have to provide data if their consumers consent for that, obviously. And we can say we have the broadest regulated scope, at least in terms of standardizing. We are aware that Australia is already talking about telecoms, energy, but we have standardized, for example, the sharing of data for credit products, open pension funds, foreign exchange investment products. And that's why we are already moving towards an open finance environment. Please, the next slide. Just to explain our journey so far, we initiated with 4 phases. We actually sped up implementation if we compare to other jurisdictions, but we were able to do that because the trailblazers like the UK and Australia had already laid down the foundation, the technical standards that we mostly based our initiative here in Brazil. But we started on February 2021 with an open data phase. Here, mostly talking about characteristics of the products the participating institutions offer and distribute, and also information about their access channels. We moved on August to a phase 2 that contains data from consumers. So the consumers must consent for that particular data set be shared between participating institutions. Here we were talking about registry and transactional data from the most relevant traditional banking products, so mostly account, credit card, and credit operations. We already have some initiatives in place in order to deliver financial planning and advisory solutions to consumers. We have also seen some improvements inside the institutions themselves, how they handle the data, how they process that in that credit risk assessments, for example, on onboarding consumers, KYC techniques also. But we are also trying to fix some issues we have seen in terms of customer experience and also some connectivity issues. And the institutions are currently devising solutions so we can improve that in the next few months. Phase 3, we are talking about services. It started on October 2021, but actually in the past few weeks, we actually saw the first payment initiator to undergo the onboarding process. That basically here we mandate them to test successfully with 4 different account holders. We also have others on the pipeline to be approved, and we expect the service should be provided to the general public in the next few weeks, actually. And phase 4, we are started with open data from those other financial products, so investment in foreign exchange, for example. The firms are currently actually obtaining certification for their APIs, and we expect that for the second half of 2022, actually, to those data being open to consumers, and we'll then be talking about transactional data from those services. Next slide, please. So I also brought how the governance process is structured here in Brazil. So the National Monetary Council and the Central Bank of Brazil issued the main rules for the ecosystem. The National Monetary Council is responsible for laying the rules for the financial institutions, the Central Bank of Brazil for the payment institutions. But we have mostly done that through joint regulatory instruments. The Central Bank of Brazil also has a supervisory role on the ecosystem. Participating institutions must be licensed by the Central Bank of Brazil to participate. As I said, some are mandatory, others are voluntary participants through the reciprocity principle I mentioned. Either way, all the participants must comply with the regulation associated with open banking, as well with the legal framework concerning our data protection regime, and also cybersecurity policy, risk mitigation policies they also have to abide. And these institutions must maintain the governance structure, which is actually responsible for proposing the technical standards and also for rendering some infrastructure services to all participants, like the participants directory. And I'll talk briefly on the next slide. So please, let's move to the next slide. This governance structure that's private backed, it has 3 layers. So a deliberative council where there are 7 seats. We have representatives from different segments, smaller, medium, and incumbents are participating there, and also a member that was elected by the 6 others, so independent member. They actually are responsible for proposing to the Central Bank of Brazil the technical standards, and also for other administrative functions under the governance structure, like approving the budget and things like that. There is a secretariat, administrative layer, and also the technical groups where the discussions actually occur, and the technical standards might be then proceeded to the deliberative council. As I mentioned, this governance structure is also responsible for maintaining some infrastructure services. Sorry, that's a complex word for me. But there we have, for example, the GitHub of Open Banking Brazil that's maintained by this structure, the service desk for handling complaints and things like that. And we also, when we were actually implementing, we saw the need to have some sort of architects that would be a few individuals that would actually try to organize the discussions on the technical groups, and also provide some feedback for the deliberative council when they were actually discussing the how approving the technical standards. But that's basically the initial structure that was employed by the market to handle the governance of the ecosystem. So yeah, let's move to the ending slide, I guess. As I said, we are actually on the verge of moving towards an open finance environment, but we are still making some adjustments in order to allow consumers to have full rights over their data and be able to share with other third parties in a secure and agile and convenient fashion. So that's what I have for our initial remarks. And just to end, we are also talking with other sectoral regulators, like our insurance regulator. So the role for the government here in Brazil, for the moment, is trying to expand the ecosystem. Open finance will try to embrace open insurance, and we are also talking about some initiatives concerning open health. So the role here in Brazil, at least for the moment, is trying to maintain this ecosystem, expand its borders, but in the future we might also see, like in the UK, some solutions that the government itself would benefit from the open finance ecosystem.
Thanks, Diogo. Again, that's an excellent kind of overview of kind of the governance structures and kind of what's driving the development of this in Brazil. We've actually had a question in that kind of came in for Jess specifically from Pierre Durant, who's asked a couple of questions already on the chat. We won't come on to it now. I want to kind of move on to all the introductory remarks, but the question which Pierre has asked Jess is, who is the primary driving force behind your program, which was directed, I guess, at Australia? Is it government or market? And I guess that the question applies to kind of, I guess, in a sense, to all the panelists, which is obviously the governments in the different countries are kind of gearing up to put the structures in place and have put the structures in place. And it's market wants this, government does this, and it's interesting to hear who's ultimately driving it. I'm sure we'll come into this in the open discussion later. I encourage the broader audience to keep questions coming through the chat function as well. But Pierre, thank you for your 2 questions so far. All right, we head north to Canada. So Michelle, over to you.
Thank you, Ian. It's such a pleasure to be here and to hear from Jess on Australia and Diego on Brazil, and soon to hear about the UK. When we look at Canada, I just wanted to kind of give a frame that I come from OBIC, which is Open Banking Initiative Canada. It's a non-for-profit organization with our mission to help support open, transparent, and trusted banking system of open data and support the growth of the well-being of Canadians and Canadian businesses. We're a neutral party for all financial services industry in Canada, and hope to help ensure that the creation of a collaborative framework for banking and finance where customer data can be shared simply, securely, and our financial institutions can lead the world in keeping Canadians have a strong future in that sense. And as we go to the next slide, we very much are trying to gather the ecosystem so that we can speak from all sides. So as we look to our board, I'm happy to share that we have a 50-50 gender diverse board, and we're very much focused on trying to include the entire ecosystem from fintechs to credit unions to banks, as well as consumers. So as the board ourselves, we just have deep industry expertise across financial services, technology, and innovation, and just bound by sharing our beliefs and values for open banking and Canadian consumers, and informing the unique experience and skill in this network to really just drive and develop open banking for all. And we're really trying to gather great minds to try and push Canada forward, because as we move to the next slide, you can see our journey is slightly longer as we get there, but some of the milestones that have happened in the last year is just trying to gather insights across the market. We have a 10-part series with Senator Deakin, really trying to describe the advantages that the UK has from a market set in their fintechs, for their banks, for their entire ecosystem by having open banking. Because in Canada, very different from the other markets, as we get to the timeline, we're still in the discussion stage and hoping to move to the development and implementation stage. So as a groundswell of information, what we're trying to do at the OBIC is really try and bring all of the insights to why open banking, open finance, open data is driving innovation and can drive added investment from VCs into our fintechs, into our economy, and really just growing our membership base and discussions and events, and trying to help join any event that is speaking about open banking to help highlight the advantages of what's happening in other markets. And we actually created a 99-page report or manifesto on why open banking is a force of good. There's many markets that are much farther ahead, and we're really trying to push ourselves to the advantages that can come from these markets. So as we go to the next slide and see the journey that Canada has had, the Advisory Committee on Open Banking was formed in 2018. It was the first step from the Government of Canada to review the potential merits of open banking in that budget of 2018. From that, we moved to 2019, a review into the merits of open banking is published. The Senate committee holds a hearing and issues a positive report, and Canada's digital charter is released. As well as we moved into 2020, the Advisory Committee on Consumer-Directed Finance, which is a unique part in Canada. Instead of calling it open banking, there's many reports to try and push the discussion to be called consumer-directed finance for the future of financial services. And a strong recommendation was given to move forward in implementation by CDF framework. And the Department of Finance reopened a second stage of consultations with the industry stakeholders, from VCs to credit unions to banks, as well as fintechs and paytechs and regtechs and all sectors, focused on the data security and privacy risks associated with open banking. As we moved into 2021, we had an election in Canada, and very happy to see that our advisory committee released the final report in August 4th of 2021, so earlier late in the summer. And in that report, it outlined a two-phased approach and setting out an implementation timeline for an initial phase to go live in January of 2023. And digital identity actually officially became a part of the ministry's mandate in December of last year, late last year. So as we're moving into 2022, implementation of phase 2 approach and outline of the final report. So in this phase 1, the system design and implementation run by a government appointing lead with 18 months to facilitate that phase 1. Unfortunately, I think due to a lot of world challenges at the moment, we still have not got the open banking lead announced in Canada. We're all waiting in hopes of having that announcement as soon as possible, realizing there's an 18-month roadmap before we even complete phase 1 and move to phase 2. And then looking at that and looking at Brazil and looking at Jess's presentation in Australia, in a very short order of 24 months in Australia, you can see that Australia has moved to open finance, has tackled telco, hopefully by the end of this year, as well as moving into different sectors of energy and completed their phase 1. And then when you look at Brazil, in a very short timeline of 12 months, has really taken up quite a bit of expansion into open finance. So very much hopeful to what Canada can do in the next 12 months as we are aiming to come to our first phase in early 2023 and hopefully having our lead announced quite soon. But as we go to the next slide, as we look to many countries, thankfully we have very many insights to gather from the UK as well as Australia, Brazil, and many other countries as Canada continues to drive forth towards open banking. I think the only other comment I will share as we look at the Canadian landscape, though we have 98% of all of our banking with the top 5 banks in Canada, there is over 4 million Canadians using screen scraping today to access services like Wealthsimple, Coho, and many different innovative fintech apps that are accessible to them. And that report is from 2019. And knowing that the pandemic has driven digital use of financial services in many different facets, that number has most likely grown to probably around 6 million. So the need to have a secure and safe way to access data and have data rights is truly needed within the Canadian landscape. But I'll pass it back over to you, Ian. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle and Grant. I love these timelines. Obviously, it's not moving. The timeline is not moving as quickly as some people in Canada, your own organisation, want it to, but it's very clearly set out. I just want to very quickly, before we go on to Valentina and Microsoft, just come back to you. I've got just one overall comment for the audience, which is it's interesting to hear that we frame this discussion as kind of open banking and open finance, but obviously as we've heard from Jess in Australia, really it's the consumer data rights, CDR, which is how this is kind of more popularly identified. And then to hear in Canada, consumer directed finance. It's kind of, we'll maybe come on to the kind of expressions later, but Michelle, I just wanted to, you mentioned this screen scraping, which is not something that I guess a lot of people talk about in everyday conversation, but you've kind of thrown that in at the end as kind of it's happening. I guess it happens beyond Canada. Just for those in our audience who maybe don't look at this issue every day, could you just very, very briefly summarize what you mean by kind of screen scraping? Is, I think you said 4-6 million people in Canada, and why why the relevance of that to the need for Canada to progress open banking?
Yeah, definitely. So screen scraping is a functionality that is being highly utilized. It was utilized in the UK, and I think it triggered open banking when you guys hit 1 million consumers back in 2017 using screen scraping. It's what Plaid and Flinks and many others facilitate. It's data aggregation to make onboarding quite simple. So if you go onto a fintech, or if you're even using your accounting system to access and ensure that that onboarding system is quite simplistic, what they do is allow for you to sign in to what looks like your bank account. You make that sign in, it then automatically populates all of the data. They screen scrape everything to facilitate that ease of use. And what's happening is now you have access to your accounting system. It looks quite simple. You think as a consumer that you've just logged into your bank. But unfortunately, what you've done is just breached your banking agreement by logging into a third party, allowing them to screen scrape the data, and therefore the data liability is unclear. There's many ways that that data is then touched. There is not exactly a very clear consent infrastructure, nor is there a safe pipe like an API directly from the banks to the third party, which is the core infrastructure of what open banking provides. It provides that clear access and consent, as well as revoke, so that you could revoke that data, ensure that you can have it removed if necessary, and that consent has to be held to prove that the consumer has wanted to access that data. So it's an unsecure way to facilitate use of innovative services.
Great. So the sooner Canada is properly up and running with its open banking regime, the better from that perspective as well, I guess.
Yeah, I would say it's quite crucial for Canadian consumers to be protected in the sense of data being accessible to all. And I think the fact that they're unaware that they're sharing this data in an unsecure way, and the fact that they are banked and they have secure banking, but they still want to have access to the innovative services and products that are out there, and are just unaware that by accessing them, those services don't have a better or faster or secure way to help them access their own data. And many people just want to have their accounting system aggregate all their infrastructure. So having it safe and secure is a very important piece for Canadian consumers as well as businesses.
No, great, thank you. I guess, as I say, it's an issue that goes beyond Canada. So I guess those tuning in who aren't properly following this so closely, it'll be interesting for them to know that that's one of the kind of issues out there. So before we come on to a much more kind of country that's much more progressed with open banking, as in the UK, delighted to now go over to Valentina from Microsoft. Valentina, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ian, and nice to connect with everybody here in this forum and in the audience. When we say open finance, open banking, and all the government, of course, as Microsoft, we take the technology perspective and how technology and innovation in technology can enable these goals, these objectives to be achieved. So the way we look at it, and we can move to the next slide, we see this movement, of course, from closed banking to open ecosystems. And we've seen from Australia to Brazil and Canada that cooperation, government to private sector, is extremely important. This data collaboration, secure data sharing allows now for new services to be derived and new insights to be derived from this ecosystem coming together and working together. Data sources are important. We've seen utilities coming together, of course, the financial sector actors, government with the different ministries, from ministries of finance and tax agency, who have a lot of the insights on the identity of taxpayers, to social services, ministries of justice, and so on. And this allows for new business model to be established. We have digital banks that are being born. We have the rise of fintech. We see players from other industries, such as retail, coming into financial services. And ultimately, we go towards this idea of real-time economy and cashless economy that it's being now conceptualized and piloted by governments such as Estonia, Finland, and others across the globe. And we are partnering with academia. One example being the partnership we have with the University of Amsterdam of understanding what a cashless economy impact would be, what will be the benefits and the limitations. If we move to the next slide, so back to technology, wanted to make the point of APIs, interoperability, open platforms are extremely important, and there are multiple technology angles that need to be considered. Security and identity, absolutely, and data privacy embedded in every single standard and process, it's extremely important. With open finance moving across borders, there's only cloud-first approach that will enable for that level of scalability and flexibility. Integration, as I've mentioned, agile development, ability to do big data analytics, and just recently we've announced the new discoveries in terms of quantum computing. And back to open banking, open finance, we are a founder member of the BIAN, the Banking Industry Architecture Network, and even from 2018, we have contributed to a reference architecture, cloud-based open. And what those APIs and technology enable, when you pair it up with artificial intelligence and data insights, it is high level of personalization, following and supporting the life events of an individual citizen as well as of a company, meeting them where they are, and supporting their needs, and allowing even for predictive, proactive services. We can move to the next slide. So how do we see the government here? Of course, it's an enabler, and we respect the regulatory role and the capacity building role that governments have in every single country. We've seen the role of treasury, of central banks here. We see government taking a next step in enabling this trusted data sharing and data standards, certification of the actors that will operate in open finance, open banking ecosystem is extremely important as well, with cybersecurity embedded at every single step. But we also see government as a beneficiary of open finance ecosystems, which will allow them to achieve their functions better, connect better with citizens, the taxpayer, collect better the revenue, the taxes to the budget, but also disbursing and allocating funding to the vulnerable population, to the needs of economy and society. And you see here there are different angles from securing and protecting the data to the regulatory compliance mechanism in place, to proactively watching the market and readjust dynamically policy with focus on consultation with the private sector, to enabling and putting in the market digital services, such as citizen wallets, for example, and more recently, digital currencies, as we see them being piloted and tested across the globe. We can move to the next slide. The next 3 slides are just showing what the experience could look like for a small medium businesses that benefits from open banking, open finance services. And this is based on the experience and the work we're driving with fintech and banks across the globe. And similarly, you can see the government having a macroeconomic view of these trends. It's a bakery, and based on the information that comes from all this ecosystem, open finance ecosystems, the financial services provider can provide advice on if you increase your marketing investment, you'll have a higher return on investment, because this seems to be the trend from peer organizations. When they've done this, this was the impact for them. If we move to the next one, by connecting with digital platforms and hospitality platforms, the bakery provides for hotels in the region. And looking at the trends, at the occupancy rates in the hotel, there is an upsell opportunity. And of course, the deliveries need to be matching this increased future demand that it sees. So giving guidance and advice there. And ultimately looking at how moving to the next slide, how to improve the cash flow, the profit and loss impact, and outsourcing, because the delivery cost by doing it in-house, it's too expensive. Outsourcing this is another type of advice that can be provided, and even enabling suggestions and matchmaking with potential delivery partners. So there's a whole world of new services, new partnerships coming into play. And I truly believe in that vision of real-time economy that helps everyone thrive. And open finance for us, with the support of technology, should be also about financial inclusion. Thank you so much. This is what I wanted to share at this point. I'm looking forward for the discussion and questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Valentina. So it's government helping business and business helping government as well. We have various questions coming in on the Q&A, and I want to get to Nick right away. But after we've come to Nick, one question that's come in from Neil Coleman is if this, I guess, open banking, open finance is due to be rolled out globally, what are the threats from are there threats from cybersecurity and corruption? So I know, Valentina, you touched on the cybersecurity angle. I think a couple of our other speakers have touched on that as well. So maybe we'll try and come on to that in the time that remains. But I'm looking forward to going to Nick from the UK HMRC. Global Government FinTech's covered a lot of what HMRC has done in the UK with open banking. So delighted to hear it from the horse's mouth. Over to you, Nick.
Thanks, Ian. Very nice to be part of a global discussion like this. It's probably worth saying that whereas most of my fellow panelists are creating regulations enabling for their countries, I'm part of a service organization looking at what our strategy should be, how we can use the potential of open banking, what we can implement. So it's a slightly different take. In some ways, it's let's be honest, it's a narrower take, but it does mean we've had a chance to work in that kind of environment and see what can happen. In the UK, there's a lot of momentum. There's been huge amounts of investment, rapid increasing take-up of open banking, both the account information and the payment information service elements of it. And one telling figure is that at the end of January, the number of UK open banking users passed 5 million. It took 10 months to go from 1 to 2 million. That was about 3 years ago, but it only took 4 months to go from 4 to 5 million. So the numbers are stacking up. People are beginning to get confidence on a widespread scale. This is something that's actually useful for them, and it's worth doing. So good progress so far, but I don't think it's a given that we're going to springboard from that into open finance and open data. It depends on having credible use cases that people and businesses want to use, recognize as being an improvement on the narrower services that are there at the moment. It does depend on this being something that's accepted as secure. It depends on not making mistakes or big missteps along the way. And that I guess is where governments are operating. I think it's an art, not a science. Governments need to provide leadership and direction and create a supportive regulatory and competitive environment. Ron Khalifa's review last year did a lot towards that here in the UK. And hopefully get light touch regulation that supports innovation at the same time as protecting customers and giving them confidence. And that approach, it works best if it's shared by the commercial players. And from my experience, I think it is generally here in the UK. They understand that it is a shared responsibility. Everyone gains when things go right. Everyone loses from a mistake. That, I suspect, is going to be incredibly important for this to really scale successfully and really start to radically change how people handle financial and other services. And I do think it's important that governments participate directly too and try to make this happen, and to some extent use their scale to contribute to making it happen. And as the UK's tax authority, we have got that scale. We've got round about 50 million customers, handle paying in and paying out about £900 billion a year. So it is a lot involved, and that's why we focus on payments. What we realised was that open banking, it offered customers convenience and security, and really importantly, it could prevent them from making errors keying in information, which traditionally is exactly what they had to do. They have to key in reference numbers, they have to key in bank account details. It does that by allowing customers to consent to using their bank details to pre-populate a payment. And when it's pre-populated, they can then authorize that payment before it's sent to us. So they do control that process. It's transparent. They can see what the data is being used for. For us, it was less costly than taking card payments. And providing accurate payment details is really important. We have to intervene with about just under 2.5 million payments each year in order to allocate them correctly to customers' accounts. And that's almost always because information is missing or details are quite innocently miskeyed. And if you're dealing with millions of payments going through automated systems, it's really difficult to put that right accurately. In most cases, you have to fish them out and fix them. And quite often you have to contact the customer. So open banking was something that offered something really different, we thought. Let's go on to the next slide. Thank you. We started off by thinking about what the right foundation was. We created, well, we ran a procurement and attracted some very, very strong contenders. And it was a procurement not just for a payment service, but it was also for an account information service. So we deliberately contracted something which was strategic and we could come back to, and it was made available to other parts of the UK public sector through a shared commercial framework. Once we'd done that, the speed of progress was really impressive. The supplier for open banking and our own digital team implemented the payment service in 11 weeks, which is really fast going by government IT standards, and I suspect by most IT standards. We didn't plunge in, we did it rolled out a step at a time. We started off with our individual tax self-assessment and then started to move through a range of other taxes. And we've been going just over a year now. It now accepts payments for almost all of our taxes. I mean, one or two of the most rarefied and niche ones still to go on, but the vast majority are there. It's attracted 1.8 million transactions so far, worth £4.2 billion. And some of them, as you can see if you're looking at the slide, are really quite large, approaching £1 million in a single transaction. So there is genuine confidence in the service amongst customers, and the take-up is growing. We're really pleased with that impact, and we're expanding it and developing it. A few weeks ago, early February, we made the payment service available on the HMRC app. Again, we did that as a controlled go live to be cautious, to minimize risk. We didn't publicize it. Even so, customers started using it to pay on the first day, and we've now had over 4,000 payments made that way. So again, that seems to be tapping into a genuine demand. the nice thing is, the easier we make it for customers to get their affairs right the first time, the easier we make it for ourselves. Open banking has cut down the amount of time, effort, and cost customers need to use to pay us, and the amount of time, effort, and cost we need to help them. So we really do think it's a win-win. And each time we release new functionality, customers are snapping it up. So I think there is a genuine appetite out there, and it will extend far, far wider than us as other areas do things like this. And it will become mutually supporting and self-fulfilling. In terms of where it goes and how it goes and government's role in that, I suspect there's likely to be a bit of a trade-off between speed of action, speed of enablement, and understanding what are the most compelling customer use cases and therefore where to focus. And the balance is going to be different probably for each of our countries, depending on circumstances, just depending on what's been achieved so far. In the UK, I think government and business need to work together so that services meet the full set of customer needs as understood by the customer, not as understood by a part of government or a particular sector. It's a bit like the idea that's been around for a few decades now, designing services around life events, but working together across traditional boundaries of private and public sector. So something like an open financing system that helps people manage their services will be better and more attractive to customers if it includes paying tax alongside paying other bills and managing investment options, rather than excluding it and leaving the customer to handle it as an additional separate task. So we can't stay aloof from that. We need to operate as partners, manage risks, exploit potential. And if we do that well, I think that there is an exceptional amount of potential in open banking. And I think it's a really fascinating area to be involved in.
Nick, thank you. I don't know, sorry to interrupt. Thank you very much for that. I guess that's your second of two slides, isn't it? Is that right?
It is. I was just about to hand back to you, Ian.
Thank you, Nick. No, thanks very much. And it kind of picked up on the thread of Valentina, actually, which is kind of business and government working together. And as I've said, Global Government FinTech has written a lot about this example of HMRC actually engaging a FinTech company to kind of process inbound tax payments in that way. It's been a while since we've heard from Jess in Australia. So I said I was going to come back to Valentina on the issue of cybersecurity, but I see that that's been partly answered in the kind of text chat at the side. But Jess, this example that Nick's just given of the UK tax authority itself using open banking, could you see, none of the presentations have really kind of touched on that specifically. Is that something that you've been aware of in Australia? Can you see it happening? What's the barrier to it not happening, or is there an opportunity you're thinking about there?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a lot of industry interest in obviously the government stepping up and having to comply with some of these data sharing obligations. So a lot of momentum here for that. We are going through the process at the moment of identifying those agencies where we can get direct, tangible benefits to consumers, so it doesn't look too much like the government's getting all the benefits. So at the early stages of implementation, we're really focused at the moment on those concrete, tangible benefits to consumers. But having said that, as mentioned in my presentation, the government did announce that we would be extending to government data, but also part of that is the opportunity to drive government participation. So We are engaged with our own tax office at the moment, looking at what the opportunities are. The big social services agency, looking at that in terms of the digital MyGov enhancements and how we can combine consumer data right with some of that rollout, and also looking at the digital identity framework and the potential for CDR to support identity verification as well. So the other agencies that are very interested in exploring opportunities include our Australian Bureau of Statistics, and it's similar kind of approach, I guess, of pre-filling much of the statistical forms that businesses have to complete, and how that can ultimately enhance their understanding of the research around the location of their business and how well their business is doing compared to others. So I think, like everyone has explained, there is just really, it's unlimited almost in terms of where you could expand to, how you could have government participate. The question for us is prioritising, as Nick's alluded to, the right use cases and making sure that the government agencies that participate early don't ultimately impact on confidence and trust, that it's not being used for enforcement activities, for instance.
Thanks, Jess. Now, I'm aware we've actually got, according to our timetable, only about 13 kind of minutes left, and we're always keen to keep it to that time. I've kind of got a question for the end, which we're going to come to in the end, and I want to get another question certainly in before then, which is about international learnings. We've had all sorts of kind of questions come in, and we've touched on everything from the challenges and opportunities of data sharing through to, we touched occasionally on digital ID as well. But I just want to put one question to all of you, which is that, we've all heard each other's kind of presentations. Is there one learning that you've kind of taken, that you've kind of observed internationally, or one theme where you think it's really interesting what this country's doing with this, or whether that's in governance, it's interesting to see that Australia set that up, or it's interesting to see the UK has that, or Brazil's doing that. So I don't know who wants to go first, but I ask you to keep it to maybe about 30 seconds each if possible. But that's my kind of question I'm keen to get in now, which is internationally, where have you looked, where have you seen, maybe during the webinar, even so far, where you think, that's something that that could be useful to us. Maybe not the fairest question for Valentina, because you are multi-country, of course. So I'll go. Who shall I go to first? I'll go to Diogo first, I think, with that question, and then I'll loop back to Valentina with kind of an overall observation that you have in terms of international learnings. So Diogo, if I can come to you, and maybe up to 30 seconds, if that's okay. Diogo, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Again, I guess the main lesson learned here in Brazil was that the regulator must be involved somehow. Initially, we thought about leaving the market themselves to propose the standards. We will only review that, but they would be responsible for supervising it, for example. But as we are pushing for more competition, we see that the participants have different sizes. We ultimately decided that the government should have a role in regulating, pushing the envelope, like I said, pushing the boundaries for the ecosystem, because the incumbents have more manpower, they have more budget. So if we don't want to keep the same status quo that has been existing for several years, the government has to play a bigger role, and that's what we ultimately did here in Brazil.
Great, thank you. Shall I go to Canada now, and Michelle?
I think I'm just quite impressed and hopeful to see what's happened across the world with the government taking a lead. And I thank you, Diego, for that comment, because I think there's a delicate balance between market and government. But I think what you're seeing with Australia and Brazil and the UK is that government-led countries that have taken on the initiative of open data, open banking, have made mass ground and have been able to help their citizens faster to protect their data, have been able to get tax payments in instead of having to chase tax payments. And really there's a benefit for all in an ecosystem where it's fair and there is strong reg ruling and ability for accreditation for fintechs in that perspective. And quickly, just to answer the question on screen scraping that was in there, really what screen scraping is that facility of getting the data. The fintechs, there's not been a breach in Canada of fintechs having their data breached, but the fintechs don't want to screen scrape all of your data to give you a product. They want to take the safe and secure data pieces through an API with consent, hold them, and not have a mass amount of data. They just want the aspects to the data they need to give you the service you want. And therefore they want a safe and secure way to do that. But there hasn't been any breaches that I'm aware of with the screen scraping method. It is just less secure. And that's why most countries have moved to that safe, secure infrastructure.
Great, thanks, Michelle. So I'll go next to Nick. Then I'll go back to Jess, actually, just for that one international learning. Then I'll go to Valentina for her kind of across international perspective, and then we'll potentially move to our final section. So Nick, up to 30 seconds on kind of something that you've picked up kind of internationally that you think is interesting from a UK perspective.
Okay, to some extent, I think the genie's out of the bottle, and customer demand and market innovation will take us all forward, ultimately to a similar place. And what we need to do is get there in the best possible order, learning from each other as we do it. But if I had to pick one thing out, I think it's Australia's emphasis on open data. It is open data, and everything else we talk about is really a subset of that. And where we get to will be open data.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, it's been interesting, the theme that's developed, which is we think we're talking about open banking, but it becomes, I think all of your presentations have reflected, it becomes, as it evolves, a lot broader than that. So Jess, over to you for your one international learning that from beyond Australia that you have.
Well, I think it's one back to Nick now, that's learning about the use for tax payments and the confidence that your customer base or your citizen base has in that's really useful me. It comes at a very good time when we need to look at that opportunity. So very helpful. And I think just having reinforced the very speedy uptake you saw in market participation through the payment side as well. That's something that for us, with only data access at the moment, we are really coming under a lot of pressure to expand to payment and action and third-party action initiation.
Great, thank you. So over to Valentina, perhaps one or two examples from you of kind of international learnings, and then we'll move to our final round of a wrap-up question. So Valentina, to you on that international perspective, I'm sure you have.
Yeah, absolutely, Ian. We see two big approaches across the globe, where countries where government takes a proactive role, intervenes, regulates, standardizes, establishes the premises of ecosystems cooperation. And it's no wonder why UK takes the lead when it comes to open finance, open banking, with the regulation in place for many years now, and strong fintech ecosystem. We also see regions like Southeast Asia, where it's the private sector that has already implemented very innovative ways of starting from social media for gaming industries to modernize open finance, open banking type of services. And now governments are catching up. Government role is more important than just enabling the services. Government looks after financial inclusion, and government look after well-being of individuals and businesses, protecting the information, ensuring that there are good premises for economic development. So this is where we see really a key role that governments are playing, and we always look forward to partner and support with technology. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Valentina. So we have actually 4 minutes left, so I'm not sure how that works out mathematically, but it's about 40 seconds each, I think. So we've obviously learned a lot looking at your kind of timelines kind of to date, and I guess some of your timelines had your kind of aspirations for open banking and open finance looking ahead. But I'd like to go around in the same order we started with. So Jess, starting with you, if I could ask for kind of 3 either predictions or hopes for open banking stroke open finance over the next, let's say over the next 12 months. So over to you, Jess, for a final input.
Right, thank you. And I touched on it in my response before. For us, it'll be trying to get changes to our legislation to enable this deeper functionality on third-party initiation. That's going to be game-changing. We see that really as not just applying to open banking, but ultimately to across the economy. So again, it's really focused on this idea of possibly starting with open banking, but then allowing that functionality to expand out across other industry players, and really seeing it as a digital concierge where people can open, close accounts, move money around with, clicks of buttons, which, we think will be a significant time and cost saving for people. And then ultimately, what we are hoping is that we see the fruits of what has been a significant implementation task, not just in open banking, but in the rollout to other sectors now, come to fruition with some really good killer apps come onto the market that really supports that cross-sectoral data mix and treats consumers, I guess, as the driver of new products and services.
Great, thanks, Jessica. Yeah, it really sounds like government creating the governance and frameworks to enable businesses to serve consumers better. Ultimately, if I capture the spirit of that. Back to Brazil, Diogo. What if you have up to three hopes for the next 12 months?
Yeah, we have done a lot in the past 12 months, and we keep a very ambitious stance. So for this fiscal year, we believe that the first thing is that the institutions themselves will start to promote some new business models. So the last year, they were mostly worried about being compliant with the rules. And in what we expect and through the talks we have had with the industry, we believe they will promote some new business models that will benefit the consumers. I guess that's the main thing that will speed up adoption of open finance in Brazil. The second, we are pushing for the payment initiation service. And maybe in the future, we will have some government-based solutions like Nick has shown to us. But we are also pushing for a service that will standardize loan proposals so consumers can compare in an electronic platform and start contracting that particular service. And we know that we are also looking something similar in terms of insurance products. So we are trying to expand the service part of open finance. And lastly, as I have talked, we are expanding towards an open financing environment. So we are discussing with open insurance regulators how to have interoperability between both ecosystems. And this will prove to be important if we expand to other areas, like I mentioned, open health. So we are currently discussing standards and how to best interoperate both ecosystems. And this will be a lesson learned for the future. And maybe the most important, but probably the most difficult we have on hand, most difficult task. But we believe we will have some strong movements in the next few months in order to allow for that.
Great, thanks, Diogo. Kind of echoes again of Australia there, actually, kind of moving beyond banking and finance. If I can ask our remaining three to be as brief as possible. So to Canada now, Michelle, your three aspirations, hopes, predictions for the next 12 months in Canada, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I hope that we have an open banking lead before the end of March 2022, so we can get started on the implementation. I hope that data portability could be added to our Budget Implementation Act, as we haven't updated our privacy laws in PIPEDA since 2001, and need some trigger of regulation to have data portability to move forward. And three, I hope that we look more towards open data as we try and drive forth to catch up, versus just trying to attempt open banking from a structural standpoint, as you're seeing the globe move towards open finance quite quickly and open data.
Great, thanks, Michelle, and thanks for keeping it concise too. Very. We'll be watching this space on the fintech SAR appointment. The open banking SAR appointment as well. So, yeah, hopefully appointed soon. Right, we're going to come to you, Nick, last. So, Valentina, kind of three predictions or whatever for open banking and open finance from your perspective.
I would say more and more personalized lifestyle type of services, proactive government services, and the example of Make Tax Just Happen. It's a good example in that direction. And metaverse pilots, as it will increase the revenue of e-commerce and experimentation with digital products, not only digital currencies. These will be the three on my side.
Right, really interesting. Yeah, really good. Kind of more end user examples. Thank you very much. Last but not least, Nick, three predictions or hopes for open banking and open finance from your perspective.
Okay, three hopes. Firstly, that we can add some further digital channels for customers. I'd hope one or more of web chat, accounting software, and open banking enabled repayments. Secondly, still building on the tax payment service, that we can let customers know their account balances after they pay in real time, which has never been possible to us before. And thirdly, a broader one, and this I think sits alongside Jess's wonderful description of a data concierge, that can translate into social benefits, safe ways of enabling people to build up their creditworthiness, or perhaps getting access to tailored financial support and education. Those are my three.
Great, thanks very much, Nick. Really kind of interesting, different kind of threes from your own perspective as well. So I look forward through Global Government FinTech to keeping track of them all. We are out of time. We're 3 minutes over. So particularly you, Jess, in Australia, thank you very much for allowing us just that overslip. Thanks to all those who've stayed with us, and also those who've asked questions that we sadly haven't had time to answer, but I know that some of the panel have been kind of replying individually to those. I'd like to thank our knowledge partner for today, Valentina's company, Microsoft. Thank you very much for making today possible. Thank you for all of the audience for joining us. You should have received an email asking us for kind of feedback on how this has run. So we do appreciate everyone who's attended quickly filling those in. Our team will send a video recording, which I guess will include the slides as well, all very useful slides with your governance structures and timelines. So everyone who has registered will also receive that. And there will also be an article on the open banking and open finance section, which is on the screen now, of Global Government FinTech, kind of capturing the key messages from the webinar. So thank you to our global panel at different ends of the working day, both for joining us, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian.